This is the first video in the series about how to make elastic waist shorts. We're going to start by drawing the pattern onto the fabric using your own measurements and a template called the Rise Ruler. Using this, you can easily draw a pattern for shorts customized to your measurements. The instructions start by telling you what measurements you need. There are 3 measurements you need to take, and it's best to be as accurate as possible with these. The details are in the written instructions, so I'll just point out a couple of important points. The measurements are in centimetres and you'll need a flexible tape measure. For your hip measurement, don't worry about exactly where your hips are, you just need the measurement of the widest part of you that is in the general area of your hips. Some people may be wider a bit lower or some a bit higher. That's the measurement you need, right around your body at that point. Write down that measurement and then look up the table in the instructions and write down how wide you'll need to draw your rectangle. For example, if your hip measurement is 100 centimetres, you can see on the table in the instructions that you need to draw it at 74.5 centimetres wide. The next measurement is your rise height. We're not going to use your whole rise measurement, which is the measurement from your centre front waist, so near your belly button, right under you and up to your centre back. That one's a little bit tricky to take. We're just going to use the rise height, which is very easy. Sit on a firm chair or stool, and what we want is the height from the seat of that chair straight up to your waist. The easiest way to do this is often to use a pencil or a ruler that you can line up with your waist but hold out so that it's parallel with the floor, and then use another ruler so that the 0 is on the seat and measure straight up using that to the pencil or ruler that you're holding out and shows us exactly where your waist is. So that's the measurement we want for your rise height. The final measurement is the length of your shorts, so you can choose that. Just measure from your waist down as long as you'd like to make them. Let's look at the supplies that you need to draw up your shorts pattern. There are 3 special templates that we're using. The first is the Rise Ruler, and it helps you draw the correct size and shape curve for the seam in the centre front and the centre back. Along with that template, there'll be some instructions, and you will also need the measurements that you took earlier. The other 2 templates are much smaller, and you can use a ruler instead of those if you want to. The first is labelled Elastic Add-on and will help you measure how much fabric you need for your waistband. The other is labelled Hem Helper and will help you measure the amount of fabric you need for your hem. You'll also need a way to make sure that your lines are perpendicular. That means that they need to be exactly 90 degrees to each other and either parallel or 90 degrees from the side of the fabric. You can use a ruler like this one that has an end part that you line up with the side of the fabric. Or you could use a quilting ruler like this one and line that end of the ruler up with the side of the fabric. These rulers make it very easy, but quilting rulers are often in inches and we're working in centimetres, so you'd need another ruler for measuring the length. Another easy option is to use a piece of A3 or A4 paper for getting the lines perpendicular and then a ruler for measuring the length. I'm using tailor's chalk to draw up my pattern, and I've made sure I have a nice thin edge, and I also have a metre rule nearby in case I want to use that for longer measurements. Now we're going to start by drawing our rectangle. This is the first part in making the pattern customized to your own measurements or the measurements of the person you're making the shorts for. So you should have all those measurements written down beside you. I have my fabric folded in half, I've ironed it, and I've lined up the selvages. The selvages are the sides of the fabric, the bit that looks a bit thicker or differently woven. They're straight, so they're good to line up to make sure that your fabric is correctly folded. We're drawing the pattern for one leg of the shorts, so your fabric needs to be folded to make sure you cut out 2 legs. Make sure there are no creases so the size will be correct. I'm starting with a line across the top that's 10 centimetres down from the top, and this is to allow space to add the waistband later on. I've made sure this line is perpendicular to the selvage down the side and that means it should be parallel to the fold up the top. I've looked up the hip measurement for the shorts I want to make on the chart in the instructions, and it tells me how wide I need to draw my rectangle. I can see that my rectangle needs to be 74.5 centimetres wide. My ruler is 60 centimetres wide, so I just need to measure across on that line I've already drawn and then a little further. I mark my starting point, then 60 centimetres, and then I'm marking another 14.5 centimetres, and that's the width of the rectangle. The next step is to draw a line down the side. The lines going down are the length of the shorts. I've measured how long I want my shorts to be. In this case, I'm going to make these shorts 40 centimetres long, so I'm measuring from the top down 40 centimetres, and I'm just making sure that I have a 90-degree corner or a perpendicular line by lining up the ruler with the top line I've already drawn and also lining it up with the side of the fabric just to be sure. Then you need to finish the rectangle. The bottom line will be the same as the top line, so I measure that to check, and the right-hand line going down will be the length of my shorts, the same as the left line that goes down. Check that all your line measurements are correct. Don't just assume that they are because you're joining the corners. Make any little adjustments so they'll be correct. You need to start with an accurate rectangle. I'm using my meter ruler here to make it a lot quicker and easier to check all of my measurements, and if any of them are a little bit out, now is the time to fix it. The whole rectangle doesn't fit very well on the screen, but I'm moving around the fabric a little bit so that you can see that I've got all my lines done now. That rectangle is probably the hardest part of the whole process of drawing the pattern. From here on, it is easier. The next step is drawing the curves or the center seams. Each of the rectangles will end up being one leg of your shorts. Remember, your fabric is folded, so you'll cut two at once. Now we're drawing the curves, which are the center front and the back seams. This is where we use this ruler. One half says front and will help us draw the front seam, and the other half says back and will help us draw the back seam. We'll start by drawing the curve that will go around the front of the shorts in the top left corner of your rectangle. Use your rise height measurement to show what line to line up with the top of your rectangle. Use your hip measurement to show you what line to line up the side of your rectangle, the left-hand side. If any measurements end up being between the numbers on the ruler, you can just use a spot between the lines. I've lined up the ruler with the corner of my rectangle using my individual measurements, and then I'm going to trace around the curve. And that's the curve, that's the center front seam of the shorts. Write on an F on the fabric so it's easy to know which side is which later on. Now I'm going to repeat this on the other corner to draw the center back seam. The part of the template we just used says front, the other part of the template says back. Move the template over to the other side of the rectangle and using those same measurements, find the lines on the other half of the ruler, the half that says back. Use those lines to line it up in the top right corner of your rectangle and trace the curve. I've crossed out that initial corner, those straight lines where the curve replaces them, just to remind me that I don't actually need them anymore. The next step is to add the waistband and the hem. At this stage, the pattern doesn't have the waistband already in the measurement because it depends how wide you want your elastic, and sometimes you might even use different fabric for the waistband and hem. So we'll add those measurements on now before we cut out this fabric. There's one little change that it's good to make to our basic pattern before we draw on the waistband. We don't actually need the fabric at the front of our shorts to be as high as the fabric at the back. To stop it having a bunched up extra bit of fabric at the front, we'll take a little bit of that out. On the top of your front curve, on the top of your fabric there, right at the front, mark 1.5 centimeters down. Then put your ruler across the top of your rectangle between the two top corners, the new corners that we now have after drawing those curves, and put a mark in the middle. That mark shows us around about where the side seam would usually be on a pair of pants or shorts. Now join that middle point that you've just marked with the 1.5 centimeter mark, just so the front of your shorts goes down a little bit. Onto the waistband now. I'm going to use elastic that is 25 millimeters wide. This little template that says elastic add-on has sizes for 25 millimeter and 32 millimeter elastic. Turn it the correct way for your elastic width, line it up with the top of your shorts using the new line you just drew at the front, and mark along the top of it. That's the extra fabric you need for making a waistband that you'll put elastic through. If you don't have the template for this or want a different width, you can just use a ruler and measure 2 times the elastic width plus 7.5 millimeters. Now we're going to go to the bottom of the shorts to add the hem. The bottom of the shorts can be finished off with either a cuff or a hem, but the measurement will be the same either way. It just involves folding your fabric to the inside or the outside. The template marked hem helper is for 25 millimeter hem or cuff or a 20 millimeter one, so you can choose between those. You can line this up with the bottom line of the shorts and draw a line all the way along to add that amount on. Again, if you're just using a ruler and not the template, you need to add on the amount you'll fold up, usually between 2 and 2.5 centimeters, plus 3/4 centimeter or 7.5 millimeters. For example, if you want to have a cuff of 2 centimeters, add 20 millimeters and 7.5 millimeters, so you'll measure 27.5 millimeters and draw your line there. And that's it. Now I've drawn the whole pattern for my shorts, customized to the exact size that I want to make and to the exact length that I would like them to be. You can use the same method to draw a pattern for longer or shorter shorts, or even for pants. You could make them in flannelette for pajama pants. The next step is to cut them out. We want to keep the 2 layers of fabric together, so add a couple of pins. I also ruled the center line right down, starting where I made that center mark before. I could do this later, but as my fabric is all nice and flat now and I have a ruler right here, it's a good time to do it. I like to have that line ruled to help me if I decide to add a pocket and I want to know where to place it. If you want to make any changes to the size of your shorts, now is the time to do it. Once you've cut them out, it's much more difficult to make them longer or wider. So I've looked at mine and decided I'd prefer my shorts to be a little bit longer. That's very easy to change now. I'm using my quilting ruler and aligning it with the bottom of my shorts to make sure I add on the same amount the whole way along, and I'm ruling a new line. Once I've done that, I'm ready to start cutting. When you're cutting out, remember to cut along the newly drawn hem and waistline, not the original rectangle lines at the top and bottom. In each of the top corners, you'll cut around the curves you drew, not the original corners. When cutting fabric, use sharp fabric scissors. Keep your fabric flat on the table, and most of the time the bottom of the scissors will also rest on the table. Use large cuts, not little snips, and try to move your fabric around as little as possible. I'm moving this fabric so that the area I'm cutting can stand the camera shot, but normally I'd hardly move the fabric at all. I'd just move around the table to be able to reach different parts more easily. If you find that your scissors don't cut very well and you are using fabric scissors, sometimes you have to hold them a little bit more firmly than regular paper scissors in order for them to cut well. My final step now before I set them aside and get ready for sewing is to copy these markings onto the other side. The markings I want to copy are the ones for the front, back, and that center line. I want these on both pieces of fabric, so I'm putting a B and an F in chalk that will disappear later, and then I'm going to turn it over and make sure I get it the right way around. The advantage of doing this is that you don't have to keep looking at your shorts to decide which is the bigger and the smaller curve, or the front and the back. It's easy to tell. But also, my fabric looks exactly the same on each side, but if I turn one of them the wrong way when sewing them together, it would be very easy to end up with 2 left legs or 2 right legs. We need to sew them with the same side of each leg as the outside, so they end up mirrored, like our bodies. By marking these cut pieces on the sides facing out for both of them, I can use that to tell me that will be the inside of each leg, and when I sew them together, I'll end up with a mirrored pair. We're done with the pattern drawing now. We've got our fabric cut out, and we're ready to sew them into shorts. I'm not going to sew this straight away, so I'm going to fold it neatly. If you don't fold it, you're going to have to iron it before you sew, so you might as well fold it neatly now. If you want to add any pockets or decorative features, now is the best time to do it. That will be your next step. It can be good for your first pair just to keep them plain, no pockets. So if you're going to do that, you're ready to start sewing them. The first step of the sewing, which is the bottom hem or cuff, is in the next video.